And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you, Aquaba, and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Restaurant. Saturdays, you and I get together Saturday afternoons, 4 p.m. on the West Coast, 7 p.m. on our East Coast listeners, and we look at what is happening in the world. And sometimes we throw a tantrum, but sometimes we just teach. Today's date is Saturday, the 28th day of December, the year 2024 in the Western calendar. This corresponds to the year 6265 in the Kemetic calendar, to which we realign our cultural clock. Welcome to the seventh millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place here on, excuse me, LIB Radio, LIBTV, and livinginblack.com. Let me introduce my guests here before I bring him onto the stage. My guest today, longtime comrade of mine, Brother Shujaa, is in the house. He is a longtime leader and contributor to various culturally conscious community organizations in Southern California. He has a new book, which gives a much deeper background of the emergence of the Kwanzaa celebrations that most of us have heard about. Or more, his book explains much more than most of us have heard about. So today we will discuss the new book. We'll discuss the background to the Kawaida ideology, and we'll talk about sustainable development for the Pan-African future. Let me welcome to the stage your brother, my brother, our dear brother, Brother Shujaa Aquaba. How you doing today, Land?
All is well. All is well, good brother. All is well. Good to see you. Abari Ghani, by the way.
All right, today is the fourth day of Kwanzaa. You know a lot about this. Could you please explain to our listeners why we are commemorating this fourth day of the Kwanzaa celebration?
Well, to clarify,
today the third day, I'm sorry.
Third day. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
And today's principle is Ujima, collective work and responsibility. I happen to be wearing a little bling here with the symbol for that out of the Nguzo Saba. And of course, Ujima is collective work and responsibility and means to build and maintain our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and to solve them together. You know, one of those principles that if we embraced it on an active basis, not only during the Kwanzaa season, but all throughout the year, it will put us much further ahead in the game. So, yes, indeed.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk a lot about these values, these principles, the Nguzo Saba, and the Kawaida ideology. But you do have a new book out. From my understanding, this is not your first book.
Well, it's not my first publication, but it is my first book.
Mm-hmm.
It begins as a Kawaida interpretation of S.T.E.M. That's really the bulk of the book. It's a Kawaida. Kawaida is a philosophy created by Dr. Maulana Karenga. And this book project grew out of my association with him and is a Kawaida interpretation of the social issues that relate to S.T.E.M. and effectively seeks to explain the value system that should inform the way we approach S.T.E.M, science, technology, engineering, and in this case, manufacturing, the values that should inform the way we engage it as a departure from the dominant culture.
All right. Well, we're going to have plenty of time to get deep into that topic for today. You sent me a number of key talking points that you did want to cover during the conversation. So I'm going to utilize that list, if you don't mind, as our points of reference for our talking points. At any given time, feel free to step into whatever territory you feel fit for the response to our engagement. So the first talking point, how did this new book and the overall project originate? And for those just tuning in, can you give our listeners the name of the new book?
Absolutely. The title of the book is Building on the Work of Our Elders and Ancestors. And I got my preview copy here. New copies are just arriving. Matter of fact, I need to check my mail to see if I got my shipment today. I've been waiting each day for them.
Awesome. I know that feeling. I'm in the exact same situation myself right now with my new book.
Yeah, they are being shipped from Amazon. I know a few people who have received them.
Mm-hmm.
It's titled, yes, there it is, Building on the Work of Our Elders and Ancestors, Merging STEM with Kawaida to Elevate Blackness and Everything Else. That's the title of it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Congratulations on the new book, the new publication. And you
Thank
say you do have your cover in your hands, your first copy in your hands?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, I do.
It
Yes,
feels good, doesn't it?
it does. It does. It's a real thing. You know what I mean? After so much work, it's a wonderful thing to see it in print and to feel good about it. You know, it really is
Yeah.
a feeling. It is a
I'm
good.
expecting to get my hands on another one of my books. You know, I have a few out. This one will be arriving tomorrow. My first copy will be arriving, then a book will be coming. This one entitled Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. So I'm really excited about that. But let's get into this theme that you've put on the table. So give us again, if you don't mind, the original project that brought this book
Sure.
forward. Can you explain that in a little more detail?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, the book emerges out of my experience
Mm-hmm.
among the cultural organizations here in Southern California, and my work experience and my experience coordinating a study group out here for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a former member of the US organization from 2005 to 2010. I have been a student of Kawaida philosophy now for about 20 years. I have been a STEM professional, mechanical design engineer, electromechanical design engineer for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not, and I coordinated a study group, as I mentioned, out here in Southern California, from Long Beach to Pomona and Los Angeles for about 12 years, and still do a little bit of a little periodic work with that.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, this book and the broader project is a project of the study group, the African Restoration Project. Uh,
Okay.
so the book itself began back in 2000 when I had a conversation with Dr. Karenga. What happened was there was a book anthology project being developed where Dr. Karenga was looking to expand the scope of Kawaida scholarship. So
Mm-hmm.
people who had been longtime students of the teachings were asked to participate in a book anthology project where we wrote a Kawaida perspective of the social issues that relate to our professional discipline. I happen to be the only engineer involved in the project. So what I had to do then was to go through all of the Kawaida writings, going back to the 1960s, to extract any teachings that were relevant to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing. And I should note that STEM typically means science, technology, engineering, and math, right? We're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I take the position that math is an inherent component of all of those things.
That is
So
true.
in our work, in my book and in this project, STEM refers to science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing. And we focused on manufacturing as part of our argument, so to speak, that one of the things that we need to do to protect our interests as Black people is increase the things that we make, you know, for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, particularly the things that we need for our survival. So um, this was going to be a publication that I was asked to participate in. So I wrote a 30-page paper for that project. My agreement with Dr. Karanga was that after writing that Kawaida interpretation, then he encouraged me to write whatever I thought was relevant to it, you know, in addition to that. So I wrote a second 30-page paper that talked about my experience that brought me to that project and offered some of the perspectives that I share in this book on my experience with Kawaida, how I had to resolve a couple of, well, I wouldn't say a couple, I had to resolve at least one major conflict I perceived between some of the teachings of Malcolm that I was already deeply committed to and some of the teachings of Kawaida. And I also talked about my aspirations for developing STEM projects through the lens of Kawaida, you know, with those values being applied. So that book project kind of froze back in 2020. So as my organization embarked upon a project starting last year to develop a new Kwanzaa themed website, and expand our product offerings related to the holiday, it seemed appropriate to pull out that paper that I had written, and use it to show how in the expansion of the Kwanzaa.org website, and in the other projects that we have, I'll talk about as we go. It was really a manifestation of everything that was being discussed in the Kawaida interpretation for STEM. So when it came time to put together the book, I took that first paper that I had written, and made a few minor changes to that. And then I made significant changes to the second part, where I talked about this project, the expansion of the Kwanzaa.org website, a new app that we're introducing called Nguzo Saba 365 to try to facilitate and promote the daily practice of the principles, as opposed to just 7 days during Kwanzaa. So that's what the book is. Then in the early part, we talk about what Kawaida says about STEM and how we should ethically engage it. And the primary focus of it is to inspire Black people to reconnect with our history and our tradition of being STEM professionals, masters of STEM. We have that clearly in our history. We laid the foundation for these disciplines, right? So the intent is to encourage us to reconnect with an understanding of ourselves as STEM innovators, STEM masters, and to take leading roles within these disciplines, so that we can bring our moral perspective to the development, use and development of these different technologies out here, so that hopefully some point not too long from now, we could get to the point where war machines are not driving the development of STEM, as it happens to be in the current context. So that's a short summary of what the book is about and where we're going with it.
Awesome, awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background that relates to how this emerged?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned, I've been a STEM professional for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
I started back in the in the mid 1980s, doing electrical control system design. I prepared myself for that right out of high school. So when I say 40 years, I mean I started working right out of high school. I also went to college, but college was a part-time affair for me. I was working full-time. I was 19 years old, with a full engineer salary, because I prepared myself through high school. I was a honor student in industrial electronics and radio and TV electronics. So by the time I graduated high school, I was able to, design control systems and do that type of thing. So I started working right away, and I've had a wonderful career.
Wonderful.
Career.
And did I meet you at Cal State University, Long Beach? Is that where you went to school?
No, we met through the community.
Okay.
And I forget, because it's been no.
It was in Long Beach, I guess.
No, I remember now. I met you through the cultural center. I think you had given a presentation at the cultural center, and found out about LIB radio. And I was impressed by what you were doing, and made contact with you. And I actually got to visit the studio, and that was our first encounter. So this had to be about 20 years ago. I was saying about 2004.
Yeah, that was the second year that we were up. We started in 2003, just about to commemorate the completion of our 22nd year. So yeah,
I
wonderful.
remember it was a program with Mabel Williams.
Wow. You just tapped a deep memory nerve there. That's why I love being around people with great memories. I've had so many of these experiences.
I don't claim that, every now and then the good stuff comes back, though,
Awesome. Well, that is absolutely great. So when putting this book together, putting together the new Kwanzaa.org website, what have been your primary objectives and what you hope to accomplish for long-term sustainable benefit of our people?
Well, I outlined 7 objectives in my book, for the book and for the Kwanzaa.org project. And perhaps I should mention a little bit more about that, so that what I'm saying, in terms of objectives, makes a little bit is a bit more meaningful. I should mention, to sort of as a continuation to your original question, my background here. I mentioned I was a member of the US organization for 5 years. Well, we also, myself and my brother, we also did a redesign of the official Kwanzaa website in 2017 and 2018. So that was the entry point to online Kwanzaa-based activity, right? We made a series of recommendations to update the official Kwanzaa website. 2018.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. We made a series of recommendations to modernize the official Kwanzaa website and add a lot of new bells and whistles that didn't exist in the original, to make it align with the current technology and the dynamic imagery that we find on the web today. Well, most of those ideas weren't accepted. And I said at one point that the ideas are too good not to be developed, So we asked if there would be any objection to us creating our own Kwanzaa themed website at that time in 2018. And it was agreed that we could go forward with that. We set up a website at Kwanzaa.net, which essentially was a supplement to the official Kwanzaa website. It contained supporting information, but we did not go forward with our full vision. We set up a few things. Well, last year we decided to go forward with everything. We wanted to do a couple of things with this. We wanted to, and I guess now, having said that, I can go to my list of 7 things, because our primary objective has always been to continue, as the title suggests, learning, sharing, and building on the work of our respected elders and ancestors. That's what we want to do first and foremost, paying homage to those who came before us, proper respect for what they've done, but also recognizing that we have an obligation to make a contribution too,
That's right.
So we're looking to meet that. Our second goal was to interpret Kawaida, to extract its vital principles, practices, and prohibitions for all fields of STEM development. That was our second objective in the book. The third intent is to engage the most effective ways to use applied science and modern technology to advance Kawaida STEM as a basis of a much needed new ethos for how we deal with STEM. In other words, we can talk about the value system that informs the use of STEM now, but we have to also offer an alternative to it, So this is being positioned as a alternative, a guide to how we should be motivated towards the use and development of STEM. Fourth objective is similar to the second and the third, where we examine how Kawaida can be more broadly advanced and applied to further inspire our people to reconnect with an even deeper understanding of who we are, right? A lot of people embrace Kwanzaa and celebrate the principles, participate in the holiday, but it comes from a much deeper foundation. Kwanzaa and the Nguzo Saba both emerge out of Kawaida philosophy, and there's a lot more to it than Kwanzaa and the Nguzo Saba. So we want to promote certain aspects of Kawaida philosophy as the most reasonable path to take for us to reconnect in the most meaningful way with who we are as a people, right? And connect with African culture and history in the most meaningful way. Fifth, the fifth objective here is to inspire other people who have an appreciation for Kawaida to do what I've done here. I've drawn from my own professional discipline, sort of in the spirit of what the that original book anthology project was.
Mm-hmm.
Kawaida was conceived to be a broad scale social philosophy that could guide the creation of a new society or a reformed society. So, in order for that to fully develop, we need the input of people who can cover every necessary field and discipline to maintain a functional society, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ethical foundation is the core, and that's what Kawaida begins with. But in order for it to be complete, and in order for it to be functional in its fullest sense, we need to not only add a STEM component to that, an idea for how we should develop and use STEM. We need a financial component to it. We need to talk about how we would engage biology and do all of those things. We need a legal interpretation, those things. So I'm hoping that by offering this STEM perspective, others might be inspired to offer a financial perspective or a perspective related to their discipline. So that was the fifth objective. The sixth
Mm-hmm.
is to create and use an effective merger of Kawaida and modern technology to promote increased understanding and embrace of the 7 principles as a daily vocation among Black people, right? We want to, I would say that, there's a lot of Kwanzaa and Nguzo Saba themed content on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
They're not out there, but we felt that the magnitude of what the holiday and the teachings represent had not been effectively captured or represented. So we wanted to put together the most dynamic site that we could with some of the most interactive components, show some of the most modern techniques, to increase the engagement, right, with it. And then the seventh and final goal is to introduce the expansive Nguzo Saba 7 principles themed online community that we're creating.
Mm-hmm.
The intent is not just to be able to present the teachings and to talk about the holiday, but to create a space where those who embrace it can engage with one another
Mm-hmm.
and share with one another and actively practice the principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
A good example of that is in the course of our work, if you go to Kwanzaa.org and go to the Nguzo Saba in Motion page, you'll see that we didn't just limit our discussion about the principles to the definition. We've identified organizations that represent each principle in the most meaningful way, and we use them as a living model of what the principle looks like in motion, right? So, for example, in Detroit, we use the Detroit People's Food Co-op and the Detroit
Mm-hmm.
Black Food Sovereignty Network as our model for Ujamaa. What
I
we
would get.
intend to do,
I was about to suggest that it's a model probably for all
oh
of the
no,
Nguzo Saba.
no, the reality is that each one of the 7 entities that we use,
Mm-hmm.
each one of the principles are in
Mm-hmm.
effect a model of all of the
Yeah,
principles.
they're
We
all
just
inclusive. I agree.
absolutely we just selected that principle that relates most specifically to them or their work to highlight,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point I'm making here is that the principle of Ujamaa talks about the need for us to develop our own economy,
That's
right?
right.
So we will be using our app to contribute to that. As a partner organization, we look forward to distributing the weekly flyer from the Detroit People's Food Co-op, so that people who are in the area can participate, can support that, and so that it also becomes a model in other communities.
Mm-hmm.
The wonderful work that they're doing, that the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network should be duplicated everywhere where Black people are.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to promote the work that they're doing and share the work that they're doing as broadly as possible so that they become that model, that others might be inspired to emulate. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with the app. That's what we want to do. That's how we want to engage, technology to promote these principles and make them become more a living daily vocation, as opposed to just something we have a good conversation about at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, congratulations on that. Like yourself, I do sign on to the idea that the seven principles of Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba, is a continuity. It's 7 days a week, every week of the year. Here at LIB Radio, we see ourselves as the People's Academy, the people's voice, self determination. But what would we be without collective economics and unity? Imani and Nia, all of the principles do resonate in our heart and our soul. And congratulations for bringing out a book to reinforce that very point. Your book, you do mention an effort to expand the people's understanding of the Kwanzaa creation story. What do you
Yes.
mean by that?
Well, essentially, what I'm doing is sharing the story that was shared with me by
Mm-hmm.
everybody who was there. From Dr. Karanga to the other participants, about the research effort that led to the holiday that was inspired by a 10-year-old girl. So what we're doing, we're recognizing 4 other people who were involved with the creation of the holiday without denying Dr. Karanga any due credit for his primary contribution to it. So when I say expand the understanding, what we do, we share the story, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the story of how a 10-year-old girl inspired the creation of the holiday. So we share that story. And then we share a introductory bio on 4 of the people who were involved in the creation of the holiday. We recognize Dr. Karanga for leading the organization, for, first of all, for having conceived of Kawaida philosophy and the Nguzo Saba before Kwanzaa was created, before Kwanzaa was even conceived. And then offering its primary ideas, and certainly being its leading proponent in the almost 60 years since it was created. So we respect him for his contribution. But in the spirit of Kwanzaa being a communal holiday, it gives us, by talking about the other people who were involved in the creation of it, that gives us an opportunity to have a broader conversation about it, right? Like, for example, talking about the 10-year-old girl who inspired the creation of the holiday gives us the opportunity to talk about the creative capacities of our children when they're raised in an environment, when they're taught about who they are and taught to love themselves and encouraged to speak their thoughts freely, within reasonable limits, of course, where all of those things are concerned. So talking about her name at the time was Kinamo Damu. Kinamo, Kinamo. Damu was the name of the 10-year-old girl who inspired the creation of the holiday. Her name, now she goes by Terry Bandele. But being able to talk about how, as a 10-year-old girl, she inspired the holiday gives us a broad opportunity to talk about our children's creative capacities, and it gives us a point of entry to engage the children about the holiday, and that's one of the areas that we didn't think had been developed enough, to engage the children with the holiday. So we've developed a Kwanzaa for Kids program to inspire the engagement, a broader engagement with the holiday with younger people. And again, that conversation about Terry and her inspiring the holiday gives us a space to do that. Another one of the creators, a man by the name of George Sabira, he was known just as Sabira. Sabira actually led the research group, and I don't even know if I covered this, so let me back up real quick. After what happened there was a meeting that was happening in December 1965. To paraphrase, there was a meeting that was happening between members of the organization in December 1965, and they were talking about the holidays. And they were talking about which holidays they were going to celebrate, which ones they weren't going to celebrate, and why. Of course, the adults were having this conversation, but the children were around, and the children were paying attention, right? Because as they're talking about whether they're going to celebrate Christmas or not, the children are concerned about what's going to happen to their fun and their gifts, right?
That's right.
So they're paying keen attention, right? So at one point, while they were talking about not celebrating the holiday, Kinamo took interest and said, well, what do the Africans do? You know, if we're not going to celebrate that, in other words, well, what are we going to celebrate? And how do the Africans celebrate it? You know? And of course, in her mind, as she's explained to me, she was concerned about the fun, you know, that she might miss out on if she couldn't, you know, she's been looking forward to the holiday season all year, right? Like children do. So she was trying to make sure that the fun was protected. And then she asked for a new holiday to be created. And she was very insistent about that, so much so that the adults began to take it very seriously, and they organized a committee, a small committee, 5-6 people or so, and they did research in libraries in the Los Angeles area, researching African celebrations. Dr. Karanga had an interest in harvest celebrations, so they focused on that. And through their research, they developed a series of practices, principles, rituals that became the foundation of the Kwanzaa holiday.
Okay.
So that's how the holiday came about. And as I mentioned, a lot of people aren't familiar with that. So we're introducing that, and then introducing the people who contributed to it, so that we can have a broader conversation about what all of that means.
Awesome. For those of you just joining our conversation today, we are talking with Brother Shujaa. He and I have known each other for many, many years. Luckily, neither one of us is aging. Longtime leader and contributor of multiple culturally conscious organizations across Southern California. He has a new book out, and he gives us a much deeper background of the emergence of Kwanzaa celebrations and takes us into what is known as the Kawaida ideology and sustainable development for Pan-African people. So those of you in our viewing audience today, I see you in the house. Brother Asar Heru says, greetings. Put the name of the book, brother's book, in the chat. I did put that up. And he says further, as a Kemetic Shimsu, I highly respect the tenets of Kwanzaa as well. And I do agree with you very much. Kwanzaa is something that we do hold very, very dear. We'll talk about some of the other things associated with there. There's a little controversy in the background, but that's not core. That's not center of our conversation.
Right.
You do talk about the relationship. In your book, you described a relationship you developed with a man by the name of Professor Earl 5X Grant, who was Minister Malcolm X's primary associate, official photographer, and the VP of his organization for Afro-American Unity, and how he, how he helped you resolve a potential conflict between Minister Malcolm's teachings and Kawaida. That's an interesting talking point. Please share why you wanted to include that in the conversation.
Well, that's because that makes up a meaningful part of the latter half of my book, where I explain who I am and how I came into this project, how I encountered Kawaida, because I was in my mid-30s, almost approaching my fourth decade when I encountered Kawaida. But I started studying Malcolm when I was in 11th grade, and I've considered, even to this day, I consider myself a Malcolmist first. committed to Malcolm's teachings. And I was most inspired by the teachings that he offered us from Mecca in the days after he left the nation, and his admonitions to us from there about the need for us to evolve beyond the propaganda that we've been fed, and as I interpret it, to return to our source, for guidance. So one of the things that Malcolm advocated for was the need for us to evolve beyond race-based thinking, from Mecca. And I took that to heart because I had resolved in my own reasoning, or I reasoned on my own, that race ideology was one of our biggest enemies.
Limiting, very limiting. I
Yeah,
agree completely.
So Malcolm's teachings enhanced or inspired my thinking on that. So when I came into Kawaida, it's not that I had any opposition to blackness or anything like that. I just believed that, as Malcolm taught, that we needed to grow beyond this race idea. First, it's not our idea. It was conceived by those who have been opposed to our best interests for so long. So it doesn't relate to our ancestors' thinking in the most meaningful.
That's right.
So that was another reason. And
you had mentioned Dr. Grant. I do have his picture queued up. Continue talking, but I just showed the gentleman being revered in the center of this image, along with the other revered ones, is Professor Dr. Earl Grant.
Yes, that's Earl Grant in the center. So Kawaida is grounded in what Dr. Karenga refers to as unbudging blackness, right? So I was initially concerned that there might be a conflict between the idea of unbudging blackness and the notion of evolving beyond race-based thinking, right? So I had developed some thoughts around this idea. I'd written on it, submitted a few papers to academic conferences. And I wrote a paper in, I think it was 2015, that I was presenting at a conference in 2017. And I met Professor Grant in 2012. He came to our study group. He was invited to he was encouraged to visit our study group in 2012. So I met him in 2012. So by 2017, I had a 5-year relationship with him, because he was so impressed with what he saw at our study group that he let us know the next day that he wanted to teach through our study group, which, we were blown away by that. I was so moved by that, because I knew who he was. I knew of his association with Malcolm. I knew how close he was with Malcolm, and because I'm a Malcolmist, it was very surreal,
That's right.
to have the opportunity to meet his closest associate, develop a relationship with him to the point where we were on a first name basis. And then in 2017, when I wrote a paper title on this that was titled "The Conversation We Need to Have with Minister Malcolm." And it occurred to me that since I know Professor Grant, have his phone number, it would be a very interesting thing to send this paper to him, and see what he thinks about it, get his response. What do you think Malcolm would say? Because that's really what the paper was about. What would Malcolm say about this potential conflict between, the idea of evolving beyond race-based thinking and this notion of unbudging blackness? So I reached out to Professor Grant, who you might hear me call him Dr. Grant, because we gave him an honorary doctorate through our study group. So I sometimes refer to him as Dr. Grant. So I reached out and I told him about this paper that I wrote and that I would like to share it with him and get his critical reflection on it. And he was immediately very interested, right? So I sent the paper to him. He read it. We made an appointment and I got to go to his home. to have a full conversation with him about this paper, where he agreed with my analysis, but he offered the perspective that only he could on what Malcolm was really saying and what the limitations were, you know. So he was able to get me to recognize that even though Malcolm was very sincere about wanting us to evolve beyond race-based thinking, he did not expect us to evolve beyond blackness, you know, immediately.
That's right.
You know, and not only did he not expect that, it wasn't necessary. Dr. Grant said to me that something big would have to happen for, you know, for that to be an option for us. And it wasn't likely to happen anytime soon. In other words, he told me that what we have to do, we have to meet the people where they are to build on what they know. And our people are grounded in blackness, and that's not going to change. So whatever lesson we want to impart to them, we have to impart through that lens. And for me, that sent me back to the drawing board, you know, so to speak, because I hadn't considered it in that way. But I was able to readily see the truth in what he was conveying to me. So as I contemplated that, I revisited the teachings of Kawaida and remembered that blackness in Kawaida is not a racial ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Blackness in Kawaida is a sevenfold cultural idea that is distinct from the racial idea in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what I was able to draw from that was that the Kawaida conception of blackness is the single most elevated conception of blackness that I have encountered in my work. So it then occurred to me that instead of advancing the argument of evolving beyond race, what would be more productive would be to promote the Kawaida conception of blackness. Because the only way we will evolve beyond race-based thinking is if we begin to see something in us that is much bigger than that idea, you know. And there's work to be done to instill that perspective in us, right? So I then reconnected with the Kawaida conception of blackness and decided that I wanted to use my 40 years experience developing S.T.E.M to help promote that as far and wide as possible, because when Black people are at our best, the world follows us, right? That's where the subtitle in my book comes from. That's where the idea that elevating blackness actually elevates everything else, you know? We find ourselves functioning at our highest, well, then that's going to inspire others. In other words, we've been waiting in so many ways for somebody else to fix things, for the solution to come from the system or to come, you know, from outsiders. We've been waiting for other people to get their thinking right and to, you know, do what they should do. And I'm arguing that it's us. We need to do that. We need to get our thinking right. We need to do the right things, and we need to become the solution that we've been waiting for. It's been in the mirror waiting for us all along. We just didn't recognize it.
Yeah, as you were speaking about this subject about the limitations of racism, I couldn't help but pull my book off the shelf. This came out in 1997, called Moving Beyond Racism, race hyphen ism. Ism is suffix meaning doctrine. Yeah. And new strategies for a new millennium. And I'm just going to share with you 2 sentences and have your comment. And this, I think, absolutely synchronizes with what you're saying. I propose that we consider that adherence to a central theme of racial identity has become limiting and too often limit to rational thought. We can shift to the significance of culture as a unifying force. I have become convinced that it is culture and not race that is the more practical unifying force for the future. Your thoughts?
Well, great minds think alike is all I can say in response to that, because that is the exact argument
Hmm.
that I'm advancing here. And I didn't bring this idea forward to suggest that this is an original idea coming from me. Of course, you've done this work, and of course, Dr. Karenga has been talking about culture, for for his entire career. We
Dr. Marimba,
recognize
Dr. Marimba Ani
Marimba
and Dr.
Ani,
Wade Nobles both come to
Wade
mind when we
Nobles.
talk about the unifying force of culture versus
Absolutely,
constant, never ending racist reactionaryism.
absolutely, absolutely. So what I'm doing is I'm adding to that conversation that's already out there,
Hmm.
and with a commitment to using technology in a way that I haven't seen used before, at least around the subject of the Nguzo Saba, to promote that, to advance that, to meet the people where they are, to reach them in the way our people are reached, you know. Um, I mean, we spend, everybody is addicted to these little devices, right? We all have them, you know. Um, and there's so much work being presented, so much information is presented with video and graphics and animation and all of those things. I'm suggesting that we need to use some of those tools to reach our people and to advance some of the teachings that we need to impart on those people. So I
I
think that
say.
what you just shared, brother, is directly in line with
Hmm.
my message here and the message of others who came before us.
That's right. Another critical message you put up as a talking point, and this kind of lingers behind the scenes in so many of the conversations we have about our Africans in America holiday called Kwanzaa. Your work also seeks to address what you refer to as, quote, challenges toward advancing Kawaida, unquote, that
Yeah,
include responding to controversies associated with Dr. Karenga related to his conviction and the US Panther Party, Black Panther Party conflict.
yeah.
Take us into those waters, if you would, please, and hopefully we won't drown while we're wading these waters.
Yeah, no, we won't, because I don't even engage it like that, you know. And the whole point for me wanting to engage those topics is to offer a perspective that's a departure from the mud, you know, so that, to inspire people to spend less time where those things are concerned. So um, how do I address it? Well,
Carefully.
right. Well, I indicate that there are a series of things that limit the embrace of the holiday, the Nguzo Saba, the teachings of the Nguzo Saba, and Kawaida philosophy more broadly. The first is I suggest just not having the connection with modern technology to reach people with it, with its
Hmm.
goodness in the way that it should. So we seek to address that. One of the other challenges, though, is, as you mentioned, the controversies that linger from the COINTELPRO era. That I mean, it was one of my greatest frustrations running the study group. Every year around this time, maybe starting in November, when Kwanzaa was approaching, we would have various young people. It was more disturbing when it came from young people
Hmm.
who would come in while we're trying to talk about the principles or the holiday coming forward, and they would say, "I don't celebrate that. I'm
They
not."
want beef. These were not vegans. They want beef.
Yeah, well, I'll go with that. But they were not interested in anything. They wouldn't be interested in anything related to Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba, or any of that, because they had been told things about Dr. Karenga, you know, and him being recognized as the creator of the holiday. They associate the holiday fully with him. It's almost like Kwanzaa is the Maulana Karenga holiday, as opposed to being, a holiday that's grounded in what is really grounded in. So it was one of my greatest frustrations, and it would be in many ways impossible to broaden their perspective on those matters, because they had an emotional attachment, to those things. The controversies, of course, are, as you mentioned, both from the COINTELPRO era, the conflict that was instigated between the US organization and the Black Panther Party. It's well documented, you know, that was deliberately created, and that there was infiltration on both sides and all of that. Unfortunately, of course, there were people who lost their lives. There were people who were in prison. Of course, most notably are Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, who lost their lives. And it troubled me deeply that we know that this division was created by outside forces. How are we still allowing this to divide us here, you know, 50, 60 years after it happened? You know, I was very thankful that a brother by the name of Klee Shaheed Sloan, I think I got his name correct, Klee Shaheed Sloan. He's an actor, and he's a member of one of the LA gangs, and I don't want to say which because I might be mistaken. I didn't look him up again right before this interview. I didn't prepare to mention him, but he was known previously as Clee Bone Sloan. He's the brother who played the gangbanger alongside Denzel in that movie. What was that big movie?
The one he won the Academy Award for?
Yeah.
I can't even remember the name of it. I never watched that movie after seeing it the first time.
Yeah, but
he
in any
played the
case,
heck out of the role, but it was the worst role they could have ever written for such a great actor.
Absolutely. But in any case, Brother Klee produced a documentary film in 2009 called Bastards of the Party, where he was seeking to address the foundation of the gang conflict in Los Angeles. And he traced that back to the conflicts between the US organization and the Panthers as somehow being the genesis of that, or contributing at a foundational level to that. So he explained in his documentary that he too had, you know, condemned Dr. Karenga because that's what he had been told. But as he did his research into the history of the gang conflict and had occasion to talk to Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, who happened to be the Minister of Defense of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party, who were, you know, they were most directly embroiled in this conflict. He said he explains it in the film. When he talked to Geronimo was like, "Nah, man, all of that stuff they saying about Dr. Karenga related to us, that stuff's not real. You know, we all got tricked. We all got manipulated.
That's right.
The things that they're saying about him, you know, that's continuing to allow the COINTELPRO stuff to work." So I was thankful that he did that. So part of what I do is just share Geronimo Pratt's words.
And just to build on that briefly, because I got a chance to spend quite a bit of time getting to know Brother Geronimo Jijaga, is that once Geronimo Jijaga put his word and his authority that this matter, this dispute is crushed, for me, that was the word. That's all the word I needed. That came from Geronimo Jijaga. I don't question it, and it's done in my mind.
I maintain that he is the single highest authority on this question, you know?
That's right.
So
and praise be his eternal name. He's become an ancestor now.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Peace and power to him always. I was stunned that some people are still able to hear his words, but still continue perpetuating the stories that contribute to that, you know, which says to me that there's an emotional attachment to that. It's not grounded in a reasonable perspective on what actually happened, you know, and people who maintain that, you know, perhaps can't be reached. But there are some who don't even know that Baba Geronimo said those things. So, you know, we want to raise that so that people can be aware of that.
That's right.
the Dr. Karanga's conviction is a little bit more challenging to address, of course, because of the fact of the conviction, right? But we engaged all of that in our study group, right? And we decided collectively that the reality is that those events transpired during a time of war and can be effectively described as wartime atrocities, right? Those are the types of things that happen in times of war. That's why we have such deep resentment for the people who create war, particularly people who wage unjust war, as was happening against our community during the time when these events happened, right? So I began with that so that we don't lose sight of who we were against, right? And where all of this stuff originated, right? And then I take the position that, well, let me say this too, because Dr. Karanga takes the position that that he's innocent of the charges, and I don't engage innocence or guilt on those questions. I don't. My interest in it comes from the community's point of interest, which began with the conviction, right? So I engage it from the point of the conviction. And from that standpoint, when I look at what has I do a full analysis. I did a full analysis of what went into it, right? And I recognized that this was a time of war for our people, but not only a time of war. This was a time when some of our youngest people, 20 somethings, you know, they were the ones leading the revolution. Geronimo speaks about that in his book. You know, he talks about how young and naive they were and how unprepared they were for the war that they were in, right? They were outmatched with resources and tactics and all of those things. And that's not to take anything away from the fighting spirit that compelled them, because I love them for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were up against a much bigger, stronger enemy. And because they were so young, they weren't as prepared as they would have liked to have been, or as we would have liked them to be. So they made a series of mistakes.
That's right.
Know?
In the book I just have coming back from the printer, I have a substantial chapter that I think that everyone who's tactically, strategically involved in the Pan-African movement should read this chapter. It's called Game Theory for Advanced Competition. And this is what was going on. It was game theory, gamesmanship, and we were just minor players in it. We had some brilliant minds, Kwame Ture, Huey Newton, a number just brilliant minds, including Jijaga. Yet then again, this was something that we weren't even aware of this existence of game theory, let alone competing against the biggest masters of game theory and colonial imperialism on the planet.
Exactly. So as I look back, and I think people should read that chapter too, because one thing is clear is that we need new strategies for engagement.
That's right.
And we need to learn from our mistakes. You know,
that's right.
We need to learn from our mistakes and not just duplicate them. You know, I mean, doing the same thing over and expecting new and better outcomes is what?
That's insanity.
That's insanity.
I'm sure you do agree that we should never just overlook people's behaviors just because they're celebrities or just because they were caught up in games that they didn't understand in the previous time. Our leadership must always be kept under the magnifying glass.
No, what I have to make clear here is that I don't condone anything that Dr. Karanga was accused of. You know, I'm not, you know, and I don't give him a pass for it. But the question for me is looking over his life and looking at his contribution since that period. Does what he was convicted of justify me turning a blind eye to the wonderful scholarship that he has developed? And I say no. I say no to that. I'm able to look back on that. I'm able to look back on that era now as an almost 60-year-old man, and I see 20 somethings, 25, 26-year-olds. And I see the mistakes that they made. And to be honest with you, Keity, I'm surprised they didn't make more mistakes,
Well,
because,
we did make a whole bunch of
oh,
mistakes, maybe a lot more than what we even are aware of in context. Just a couple of comments have come in the chat. I want to acknowledge the brothers. Brother Asar Heru and Brother Gus are both in the house, and they said Dua Ashe on culture and the one of Kemetic philosophy and tenets, very important. And also, Gus said Trading Day, I believe is the name of the movie. There's actually Training
training
Day
day.
with
Yeah,
Denzel
training.
Washington. And we do appreciate you putting in that and reminding us of that. It was actually a very good movie. I just hated the character. I thought it was one of the most despicable characters Denzel ever played, and I thought he could have gotten his Academy Award for playing Malcolm X in Spike Lee's movie.
Well, it says a lot about the society that we live in, that one of
Correct.
our most celebrated actors would get the highest award for playing the most despicable character that they could imagine. You
That's
know.
right. I mean, he
Uh,
played the heck out of that character. He was despicable, but that wasn't
oh
his
yeah.
best work.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So
That's
so to
right.
continue to continue my point, um,
Hmm.
um, we looked at the fact that even if we consider that Dr. Karanga is responsible for everything they say that he was responsible for, we didn't see a continuing pattern of that behavior outside of that era, and there were things that the acts that he was convicted for were deliberately inspired by the COINTELPRO effort, so without that influence, there's no reason to believe that those events would have transpired, because there hasn't been any type of a continuing pattern of that behavior. So outside of that context, those things have not occurred. In fact, what has occurred during the almost 60 years since that is that Dr. Karanga has made a tremendous contribution to the rescue and reconstruction of African history and culture, not only through his leading contribution to the creation of the Kwanzaa holiday, but also through his original interpretation and translation of some of the original sacred texts, and having written Introduction to Black Studies, which is the leading introductory text for the study of Black studies at the college level throughout the nation. So to me, it seemed not only insanity, but almost suicidal for us to allow those things from almost 60 years ago to cause our young people to say, I'm not going to consider this knowledge. There's no justification for it, as far as I'm concerned. So we seek to share that perspective to try to, offer some broader context from which to consider these issues, and to offer insight on a hopefully elevating perspective, so that people could see that what we're losing through these things is so much more meaningful than what is gained by rehashing those things as if they are current events.
Hmm. Okay, let's get a few more of these talking points in the remaining time we have. We welcome those of you for your contributions. Always, always appreciated. We continue a couple more talking points. What can you tell us about the online community that's emerging through your Kwanzaa.org website?
I'm glad you asked. What we're
Hmm.
we're as I mentioned, we're setting up and we're actually I need to double check to see exactly what the status is, because we've run into
Hmm.
some technical difficulties getting it all launched, but it will all be launched here very soon. We're setting up an expansive Kwanzaa for Kids program with content for children, cultural themed content, which is a merger between culture and STEM. So we have a few cultural craft tutorials up there for children, with videos that are done in a style similar to what our children are used to through watching programs like Sesame Street and those types of things to guide them through. We have downloadable content for them as well. We have games, interactive games that are related to the holiday and to the culture for the children to play. In terms of the online community, we have space that we're setting up for ourselves and our partner organizations to also be able to post their own content, cultural or STEM-based content to share with the broader community. And we're leading that off with a few STEM-based instructional videos where we're teaching on doing some basic web development. We'll also be teaching on using Google Docs effectively, because it's a very common tool out here, but not everybody is as functional or as literate as they would like to be, as they could be in the use of it. So we're offering that. And I'm a little bit behind on putting this together, but I'm also going to develop an instructional tutorial on 3D printing, to introduce people to 3D printing and give some guidance on exactly how that's done, what the benefits are, and the scope of it. So we're introducing that. And as I mentioned, we have space for our partner organizations to be able to offer their own content, with the idea of creating an online community and an online resource, for our own development around culture and STEM.
All right. Congratulations on that. And apologize, everybody. I don't know why my camera is freaking out. It's trying to make me disappear and flash through an alternative galaxy. So I'm holding onto my desk real tight to make sure I just don't fly away.
That
But
looks
we
like
can.
that looks like a bad connection to me, meaning a physical connection with the cable. So make
Yeah.
sure that cable is plugged all the way in.
Well, and yeah, my stuff never moves. So what I will do is I think I can turn on an alternate camera over here. And maybe if the fixed camera doesn't do that, but that's irrelevant for right now. We can continue here. One second, I can just switch to the integrated camera, and I think that's got me back up. And hopefully, we're not having that issue any longer. Let's continue. We have a couple more talking points. You suggest in your book that the applied values focus of Kawaida and the Nguzo Saba could potentially replace the race-based thinking way as a way of understanding each other. That sounds pretty interesting, putting in this new cultural paradigm for better comprehension, understanding of who we are and how we relate to each other.
Absolutely. Well, what I mean by that is that in practice, what really defines our unity is not our shared history, certainly not our shared skin color. What defines unity is shared values, goals, and practice, right? And what I'm suggesting here is that we've been led astray by this notion of unity based on skin color. When the people who are actually running things are actually practicing unity based on shared values. The people we're competing against, they've offered this idea of race as a guiding principle, but their structure is set up where they have everybody on their team.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us are
When
on their
they need
team.
us, when they need us.
Yes, a lot of us are on their team, and there's no reference, there's no criteria for shared skin color as the primary point of unity. What's required is shared values.
What
And
you just took us into another area of conversation. We almost need to come back on a separate program to talk about what we have discussed many times over the years here on LAB Radio, called, instead of racism, we should be, if we're going to be talking about that at all, it's colorism. Because even within African people ourselves, we can see a hierarchy based upon different degrees of skin melanocyte density,
yes,
colorism.
but even with that, that is a conversation about values, right?
And hierarchy.
Exactly. So that supports my argument that ultimately our unity is based on shared values, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if we understand that and develop that in the most meaningful way in practice, then we absolutely can get past this idea of race, and we can establish a necessary criteria for what it means to be us that goes beyond how we look, or where our ancestors came from. It becomes a question of how we are living and what we are
That's right.
contributing to the forward flow of our communities, you know.
Let's come back. Let's come back again. I want to, because I like the way that your brain engages these topics. I want to engage this with the theme being instead of racism, what can we do that's better, more practical than that? I'd love that conversation with you, Brother Shujaa.
Absolutely, I think we should do that.
All right, we're going to make that arrangement. Let's get a couple more points in before we're going to have to wrap it up for
Well,
today.
give me that last one, because
Yeah,
that's
I
connected
was
to,
just about to repeat the last one.
yeah.
You suggest that the applied values focus of Kawaida and the Nguzo Saba could replace race-based reactionary thinking.
Yeah, and I just addressed that. But
Hmm. And you
the
have one
follow,
more talking point.
yeah,
You also suggest in the book that your study of Kawaida led you to understand why all Black people don't get along, despite Rodney King's admonition, and why we have not been as successful as we would like in our efforts to organize around Blackness.
yeah.
Please go
Well,
deep on that, brother.
and I'm not gonna go too deep. I'm a because the solutions are simple. Really, the answers to those questions are simple. We haven't been able to unite around Blackness. I've already given one of the reasons, because that's not our idea. Race
Hmm.
is not our idea. That's not an African idea. That didn't come from Africa and African ancestors. That was imposed upon us. That whole idea was conceived as a way to justify oppressing us and to establish a hierarchy that placed Europeans or white people at the top and with us at the bottom. You know, it's not our thinking. So that's one reason why we haven't been effective using it. Secondly, um, besides it not being ours, it is counter to the direction that we need to be going, right? In terms of promoting how we live and what we actively contribute, and moving away from the notion that what we look like determines our value. Is actually
Hmm.
what we contribute and what we are bringing forward in the world that determines our value as people. So that's part of the argument, that we need to evolve beyond that thinking.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
If I could put this in context, what you're saying right now, we have in the United States just encountered a very divisive, problematic national election. On the one hand, you had the return of the populist Donald Trump. I don't want to spend too much time on that because we know the depth of that conversation. There's not much there. But that
Right.
the Democratic Party tried to pull a slick one over on the nation by putting up a candidate that had not been chosen by a Democratic electorate across the country with a primary process. And real interesting that they portrayed her as the Black people's champion
Yeah.
before Donald Trump opened his mouth at, I think, the Association of Black Journalists Convention, NABJ, and questioned the blackness of Kamala Harris. I had done so here on LIB Radio. And
And
I didn't just ask the question, I answered the question as well. How could the Democratic Party, the mass media, and a select handful of chosen Black leaders, how could they have pulled such a fast one over on us that Kamala Harris represented our quote unquote Blackness?
well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that at all, because I do want to add a bit more to my comments about why we haven't been able to unite around Blackness and why all Black people don't get along. But I think the simple answer to your question is because they didn't have another option. The way that was done with Joe Biden, first of all, I should say that I actually think at the highest levels, the Democrats and the Republicans are working together. I mean, they serve the same master. The money powers control all of them. So when I saw Biden stalling, and pretending that he didn't recognize that, he had no chance against Trump. I mean, but he stayed in there so long that there was no opportunity for anybody else to be a viable candidate.
Especially when the Democratic National Committee had thug elbowed everybody else out of
Exactly. I mean,
line.
they blocked many other viable candidates from ever having an opportunity to get a legitimate run at it. And then
That's true.
at the time when he finally checked out, they had to go with somebody who was already on the ticket, or they had to start their fundraising all over again. So when I say they didn't have a choice but Kamala, no other choice besides Kamala, that's what I mean. They didn't have any other choice besides Kamala. And then, as happens all too often, the masses just fell in line, and didn't offer any critical challenge to it, and continued enabling the Democratic Party to continue to pretend that they're best interests.
Yeah.
But I want to.
I like the way you put that. They continue to enable them, like
Yeah,
someone enables an alcoholic to continue their bad behavior.
absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
There's much to be learned about that. But again, I didn't want to spend too much time on it because I cut short my response to why all Black people don't get along. And I should mention this. This was an exercise that we engaged extensively in our study group.
Hmm.
And the primary tool that I used was to just ask Black people, what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be Black? And I don't think you would be surprised to know that there were a range of responses that were offered to that. And a majority of the responses were clearly derived from the racial conception of what Blackness means and all of its diminishing characteristics, because so many of the responses would be based in stereotypes or in our experience as an oppressed people. Very few people, some but not enough, would give an elevated conception of what it means to be a Black person. And of course, the people who have studied and, the activist minded people, they do that. But it didn't happen enough. What I found was that one of the reasons, a primary reason we haven't been effective united around Blackness is because we don't have a common or a shared and adequately elevated conception of what it means to be Black. And in the absence of that, how can we possibly unite around Blackness in the most meaningful way? If we're working with different conceptions of what it means to be Black, well, we think we're on the same team, but we're playing by two different playbooks, which explains why one is pulling in this direction and somebody else is going in that direction, and we can't, get the collective benefit of those efforts in the way that we want. And it's because all Black people don't have the same values.
They
Is
don't have
that
the
fair?
same culture.
We just don't have the same values. So,
Hmm.
and an attempt, I would argue that an attempt to unite around Blackness will always be challenged, to say the least, as long as we're not operating with a consistent set of elevated values and an elevated conception of who we are. So that's
Hmm.
where that last talking point comes from, and why I think that why I believe I've come to an understanding of why all Black people don't get along and why Blackness hasn't been effective as a point of uniting our efforts. Again, I should specify I'm talking about Blackness as a racial ideal. I'm advocating for Blackness as a cultural ideal because I believe that in its depth and its substance, it has the capacity to not only represent that elevated conception of Blackness, but to give us something meaningful and almost divine, if not fully divine, to unite around, and an associated mission and responsibility that goes along with that.
From this perspective, do you make a distinction between the definition of a unifying Blackness and the definition of a unifying Africanness?
Well, I'm using Blackness as a cultural concept, sort of um, um, as a synonym of African, because the most elevated conception of Blackness is equivalent to Africanness as far as I'm concerned. So I don't deal with a distinction between Africanness and Blackness in the course of my work. I see the most elevated conception of Blackness as being equal to what I think is justifiably referred to as a conception of what it means to be African.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I make that statement is that most people are unaware that if you take all of the major ethnicities on this planet, you have listed India, the most populous national people, followed by the Chinese. And if you take African people on the planet, while the Indians may number about 1.45, at most 1.45 billion, probably more like 1.44 or so. The Chinese will be slightly less than that. They're even now talking about recounting the Chinese. They may have overcounted them significantly. And you add their diasporas to their national populations, African people at 1.755 billion are the number one ethnicity on this planet. But we don't even, our leaders don't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
so.
if we're the number one ethnicity on the planet, why are we being pushed around by everybody and having our ice cream, our lunch money taken every day by other people who are hungry and don't necessarily want to work for their own? They would rather just take it from us.
I would simply say it's just because we don't understand ourselves in those terms.
Mm.
We don't recognize who we are. Our self-conception has been defined by others, for far too many of us, and the only way we're going to be able to harness the power in who we are is by developing our own and advancing our own conception of who we are, tied to the best of what our ancestors have offered us.
Ashe. Let's get a couple more of these comments in as we go to wrap up today's conversation. We do have Brother Kay Wellis is in the house, or Kay, or Sister Quayle Ace, I think it looks like. When engaging the race concept, isn't that engaging an illusion that manifests as a cognitive delusion? That's a pretty tough question.
That is. Well, I mean, some of our most I would say respected scholars, from our most respected to not so to the common people, will readily say that race is a fallacy. There's no justification for it in biology, and that. But at the same time, it's a social construct, and we can say that race ideology is not real, but racism is, and an effective response to racism requires dealing with the reality of race ideology that informs it. So we're not able to just dismiss it because there's no scientific foundation to it. We have to decipher it to understand why it has been able to be so effective, even while being an illusion, in order to understand how it's had that impact, in order to be able to counter that, So if I understood the question correctly, I mean, it is a fallacy, to engage it, to embrace it as the foundation of your reality. It reminds me of a lesson or a quote that I've heard from Dr. Karenga. He says that the highest definition of social power is having the capacity to define reality for others and cause them to accept it, even when it's to their disadvantage. And when I heard him say that, I said, well, isn't our embrace of race ideology the highest demonstration of that? You know, because we know it's a fallacy, yet we embrace it as the foundation of our identity, even though it has been to our advantage, our disadvantage, more so than anybody else, you know? So we got to deal with the fallacy of it and the reality of it,
Mm-hmm.
and constructing an alternative to it.
Let me ask you this question. Define racism.
Well, racism is the administration and social policy of race ideology, the application and administration of race ideology in social policy. That's what it is.
Uh-huh.
There's often meaning that when I get a form for a job or for a credit report or a credit card application or a loan or something like that, and I got to check off the box whether I'm black or white, well, then that's racism.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning of it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we often think of racism only as racist oppression or
Mm-hmm.
oppression that is grounded in race-based thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But that is oppression. You know, racism, the word itself gives you its meaning. Race, as you did in your title, race dash ism. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the suffix ism tells you that word is a derivative of that prefix, right?
And the ism is a suffix that means doctrine. That's
Yeah.
a clear understanding. So from
So
my perspective, oh, go ahead, continue.
no, I was just going to say, so in that sense, then racism is the doctrine of race ideology. It is
And
the thought process that informs it and manifests it in social policy.
mhm. In the book, I give three definitions for racism. The one that you listed has the power component, the power dynamic. And many times, Black scholars, Black leaders will include that. This power dynamic must be here. Otherwise, the racism has no teeth. From the white people's perspective, they define racism as you don't like me based upon these criteria that we identify as race. I put in a third definition, racism, ism hyphen ism, a suffix meaning doctrine. In mine, it is a doctrine based upon the notion of genetic identity. Your thoughts about doctrine based upon the notion of genetic identity?
Well, um, I don't know that I have an in-depth response to that. I would have to think about that
Mm-hmm.
some more.
It does provoke thought.
Yeah.
According to that definition, I am a racist.
Well, but and I will confess that my mind kind of got off track based on something that you said in the lead up to that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
where you said that you have to have power to be a
That was
racist.
from the Black definition, the
Yeah,
power dynamic.
I dispute that fully. You don't need power to be a racist. You need power to be an oppressor.
Or you need power to be an empowerer.
Yes, you need to. Yes, and that's the opposite. That's the polar opposite
Mm-hmm.
of
But it's
being
the
an
same
oppressor.
power.
Yes, you don't need power to have a confused idea that you try to impose out in the world. A white guy, homeless guy, who has nothing to his name, but because you the N word, he don't have no power. But he just revealed that he's a racist. You know, so this idea that you got to have power to be a racist is one of the fallacies
But
that I think.
that definition you just described is the white people's definition. he doesn't like you because of this perceived racial exclusion.
Well,
That's different than the power dynamic. You explain. He has no power, but he doesn't like you. So in their definition, he's a racist. And some black people will take that definition to heart rather than just walk away saying, "Poor guy. I understand why he lashes out at the world."
well, yeah, no, I mean, if he doesn't like you because of your skin color and his perception that you are of a different race, then yes, by definition, he is a racist.
Hmm.
There's no question about that, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but he doesn't have any power to influence your life.
And
So
he doesn't have that advantage of genetic nationality. See, from my definition, being a racist gives me an advantage toward the specific goals that I would wish to achieve, such as Pan African global unity, which is much more important to me than any notions of racism.
yeah, well, we'll have to make that part of our follow-up conversation because
I look forward to it,
my
man.
my first instinct is to challenge that, you know.
Good.
So I would welcome the opportunity to study a little bit more of your perspective and
Yeah.
include that in the discussion.
I'll send you a digital copy of Moving Beyond Racism. I can drop that to you later today.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right, all right. Let's begin to wrap up the conversation. We've talked about a lot of different things. People need to know how they can learn more about your upcoming book. You say it is returning from the printer on its way right now. They will be
Yeah,
able to
no,
get their hands on it.
yeah, it's being shipped right now from Amazon. So I would the point for access to everything that I've talked about is Kwanzaa.org. So go to
Hmm.
Kwanzaa.org. You click on the tab to select the shop menu, and that will take you to the page where you can purchase the book directly from us. But I also encourage people to go to Amazon and put in the title, Building on the Work of Our Elders and Ancestors, where they can also access the book. And Amazon will get it to you quicker than I would be able to get it to you right now because I'm still waiting on my books to arrive.
All right. A couple comments have come in. We're going to close out with these from Brother K. Quaylee. I think it's Quaylee Ace. Race is an illusion. Racism is a social construction. And again, that might be a fourth definition.
Yeah, but it's
Again, ism is a doctrine. So if we understand, take ism off of the word race, now we have a doctrine. You have to define the doctrine if the doctrine exists at all.
oh well, you can go and find official definitions of race put out by the U.S. government. They've changed. They changed dramatically over time,
That's
and
right.
have changed significantly within the last 30 years. A lot of people would be surprised to know that according to the official United States government definition of races, that white people not only originate in Europe, but they also originate in the area known as the Middle East and Northern Africa. That's part of the definition as it was rewritten in 1997, you know?
And the question I would have to you, and we're going to have to wrap it up, are white people the only ones allowed to define reality?
I emphatically no.
Oh,
But
no.
so far it seems that their perception of reality has been most broadly accepted by people, even to their disadvantage.
Who was it the quote? I mean, you may have said it earlier. Power is the ability to define reality and have others accept your definition as their reality. Did you say that earlier in the show?
Yeah, I did. I quoted Dr. Karanga and his the highest. He says that that's the highest definition of social power, and I know Wade Nobles has a
That's right.
definition that's very similar to that.
That's
And
where I'm familiar with it. Yes.
yeah, and others offer a take on it that also draws from the same elements.
That's Malcolm X said the very same things in his own words at his time. People, once again, how can they best get in contact with you?
The best way to reach me is through the website, Kwanzaa.org. I'm also willing to share my number if people want to reach out to me
Mm-hmm.
directly.
Mm-hmm.
My email, you can reach me by email,
Mm-hmm.
at Kwanzaa.org. That's the way to reach me directly. And my,
Okay. Sorry about that.
yeah.
Okay, just getting the bumper music coming out here, and the bumper music is switched over to the Bluetooth player. Thank you so much, Brother Shujaa. You brought a strong conversation today. You can always just go to our Rumble website and get access to this program at any given time. So, to each and every one of you, I want to thank you for tuning in. This has been the Conscious Rasta Rant. This has been an extended program today because of our esteemed guest. Thank you, Brother Shujaa. You certainly brought us strong, for which we are so grateful. Ashe, 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 yo.